Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Now we are going to do question number 10, part 2, and we will learn how to find the rank of a matrix. This is the matrix which is given to us. As you remember, to find the rank, first step is to find the echelon form of this matrix. First of all, we are going to find the echelon form of this matrix. For that, what do we need? The first condition for the echelon form is that the pivot should be equal to 1. What is the pivot? The pivot is the first non-zero entry of each row. Okay. The pivot of this row will be the first non-zero entry. That is the first non-zero number that we see when we move from left to right, like this. Okay. For example, in this row, the first non-zero element is 1. This is fine because the pivot is equal to 1. And then, what is the second condition? The second condition is that the entries below the pivot should be equal to 0. Okay. So now what do we have to do? This is the pivot, and we will make the entries that below the pivot. If there is a pivot in a row, then all the entries below that pivot, that should be equal to 0. If they are not equal to 0, we will make them 0. Okay, we transform those elements to 0. So starting from the first row, the pivot is 1, and we have to do these elements. We have to transform these 2, 1, 3 to 0. We have to bring 0, 0, 0 in 3 of these places. Okay. So starting, first of all, to make this equal to 0, as we are working in column 1. Okay. While working in column 1, we always use multiples of R1. And when we want to make zeros in column 2, we will be make use of row 2. Okay, we are going to use multiples of R3. Similarly, when we go to column 3 and want to make zeros over there, we will use the multiples of R3 and so on. This the main thing that you have to remember, that the multiples of R1 will help us to make zeros in column 1. Multiples of R2 will bring zeros in column 2, and multiples of R3 will bring zeros in column 3. Okay. The main theme will be we will be adding some multiples of one row into another row. This will be the main formula. Okay. While we are working in column 1, we will be adding the multiples of R1 to different rows over here. If you want to make this 2 equal to 0, it means we are in R2. So you are going to put R2 here, and you are going to use the multiples of R1. Okay. To make this 1 equal to 0, the same procedure. To make this 3 equal to 0, we will use the multiples of R1, and addition will be done to R3. Okay. When we are in R2, addition will be done to R2. If we are making this 0, this is in R3. So here we are going to make the addition in R3, and to make this 3 equal to 0, this is in R4. Then we will do addition in row 4. Okay, and the multiples that we are going to use, that would be of R1. So let us start the procedure. First, I want to make this 2 equal to 0. Okay, I want to transform this 2 to 0. For this, as it is in R2, so addition will be done in R2, and as we are working in column 1, so we will add multiples of R1. Now, if the element is 2 over here, we want to transform 2 to 0, then we are going to multiply the negative of this number, okay, the opposite of this number, to R1, and add it to the same row. Okay, so we are, as it is equal to 2, okay, so we are going to multiply negative 2, which is opposite of 2, to R1. Negative 2 will be multiplied to R1, okay, and then it will be added to 2, because negative 2 can make this 2 equal to 0, and if you want to make 2 0, we will have to add a negative 2. This will give us 0. So the main idea is this. So in order to add negative 2 to 2, we know that we can add any multiple of a row to other row. So we will multiply negative 2 by this to this row to get a negative 2, and then we are going to add it to R2. Okay, so that we get a 0 over here. This is the main thing. So always choose a number which is opposite to this number. Multiply it with R1 if you are working in column 1, and add it to the same row. So taking negative 2, multiplying it to R1 and adding to R2. This is the first step that we are going to do. Okay, so when negative 2 is multiplied to 1, we get a negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2 will give us 0. The first row will remain the same. There will be no change in the first row. Okay, in this row the change always occur in the row to which the addition is done. Okay, the change will be in R2, not in R1. Okay, the R1 will remain the same, the change will occur in R2. So multiply negative of, if you want to make this 2 equal to 0, multiply the opposite of this number to R1 and then add it to R2. So what do we get? Negative 2 multiplied with 1 will give us a negative 2, and negative 2 plus 2 will be equal to 0. Then similarly, negative 2 multiplied with negative 4 will give us positive 8. Positive 8 added to negative 5 will be positive 3. 8 minus 5 is equal to 3. Negative 2 multiplied with 7. That will give us negative 2 into negative 7 is positive 14, and positive 14 added to 1 will give us 15. Now this is we have brought the first 0 over here. Now we will make these and these also equal to 0. To make it equal to 0, simply what do? You just subtract R1 from R3. Okay, or another, you may also say that we are adding the opposite of this number. If this is 1, it will be, there will be a negative 1, and we will be adding, as we are working in column 1, so we will be adding the multiples of R1 throughout. Okay, and first of all we have to bring zeros in column 1 first. Don't move to any other column unless you have finished your work in column 1. So R3 plus negative 1 into R1 is the same as R3 minus R1. You just subtract R1 from R3. 1 minus 1 will give you 0. Okay, negative 2 minus negative 4 will be negative 2 plus 4, and which will give you a positive 2. Then 3 minus negative 7 will be 3 plus 7, and it is going to give you a 10. Now similarly, to make this 3 equal to 0, what we are going to do? We are going to multiply the opposite of this number. Okay, opposite of this number to which row? To R1, because we are working in column 1. As long as we are working in column 1, we will be using the multiples of row 1. Okay, not any other row. And addition will be done to which row? To R4, because 3, this element is in R4. Therefore we will be adding the multiples of R1 to R4. So we will be adding negative 3 times R1 to R4. We will multiply the first row with negative 3, and then we are going to add the number to R4. Okay, so coming here, negative 3 into 1 will be negative 3, and negative 3 plus 3 will give us a 0. So put 0 over here. Okay, and now negative 3 into negative 4 will be positive 12. Okay, and positive 12 added to negative 7 will give us a positive 5. So what do we get? Positive 5. Similarly, negative 3 into negative 7 will be 21, and 21 added to 4 will give us 25. So write it 25 over here. This is what we get by performing these operations. Okay, now pivot is 1. In row 1 the pivot is 1, and all the elements under this pivot are equal to 0. Now So column 1 is done. Now moving to column 2. While working in column 2, the pivot will be in in row 2. Okay, and first of all reduce this to 1 because it will help you to bring zeros under the pivot. The pivot should be made equal to 1 first, because this helps us to get to this step. This step will the second step will be much easier if the pivot is equal to 1. So the first step is to make the pivot equal to 1. When we are working in column 2, the pivot will be in row 2 always. Okay. Okay, now we want this 3 to be equal to 1. For this we know that any row can be divided by a non-zero constant. Okay, so dividing this R2 by 3, what do we get? I want this equal to 1. Okay, and one more thing is that if you observe this matrix, 3 and 15 are both divided by divided by 3. We can divide this 3 and 15 both by 3. Similarly, 2 and 10 can both be divided exactly by 2. 5 and 25 can be fully divided by 5. So therefore, to reduce these numbers, okay, we will divide R2 by 3, we will divide R3 by 2, and in the same way we are going to divide R4 by 5 in order to reduce these numbers, okay, which will make the calculation more easy. Okay, dividing the first row will remain the same because we are not doing anything to this. Dividing R2 by 3, okay, R3 will be divided by 2 and R4 will be divided by 5. Now, in order to divide this row by 3, 0 divided by 3 will be 0, 3 divided by 3 will be 1, and 15 divided by 3 will be 5. Similarly, over here, 0 divided by 2 will be 0, 2 divided by 2 will be 1, and 10 divided by 2 will be 5. 1 and 5. Now 0, 5 and 25 both are divisible by 5. So 5 divided by 5 will be 1, and 25 divided by 5 will be 5. Okay. So this is the matrix which we get. I'm moving to the next page. Now this is the pivot, and all the entries under this pivot are equal to 0. Now in row 2, the pivot is 1. So now we have to make these two entries equal to 0. Okay. For that we know that subtracting R2 from R3 will make this one equal to 0. Okay. So moving on, 1, -4, -7, okay, and what do? We are going to subtract R2 from R3. Now as we are working in column 2, okay, so all the help will come from R2. We will be using multiples of R2 or subtraction of R2 from the other rows. Okay, do remember that. Here we are working in column 2, so now we are going to make use of R2. Okay, we are going to subtract R2 from R3 as well as from R4 to get zeros under this pivot. So R4 minus R2, 0, 1, 5, and the change always occurs to the row in which addition or from which subtraction is done. Okay, so R3 minus R2 will be 0 minus 0 will be 0, 1 minus 1 will be 0, 5 minus 5 will also be equal to 0. Now moving to R4, R4 minus R2 will be 0 minus 0, 0, 1 minus 1 will be 0, and 5 minus 5 will be 0. Now if you observe this matrix is in echelon form now, because the pivot, the first non-zero entry, if there is a non-zero entry, then it must be equal to 1. This was the first condition. The second condition was that if that the zeros under the pivot, the entries under the pivot, they should all be equal to 0. So now this is the pivot, this is the pivot, and we don't have any pivot in the third row because there is no non-zero entry. Similarly here, the first non-zero entry is not the first leading entry is not a non-zero number. So here also we don't need to make the pivot equal to 1 because you don't have the pivot. Okay, here the pivot you have in row 1 and row 2. In both these rows the pivot is equal to 1, and the entries which are under this pivot are all equal to 0. So it means the first and second condition, both of the conditions of an echelon form are satisfied. Now what is rank? The definition of rank was that it was the number of rows is equal to number of non-zero rows in a matrix when it is in echelon form. Therefore, the number of non-zero rows in a matrix when it is in echelon form is equal to the rank of the matrix. Okay, so we know that this matrix is in echelon form. Both the condition of echelon form are satisfied. Now what do we have to do? We are just going to count the non-zero rows. We know that this row is equal to 0. This is a 0 row. R4 and R3 both are 0. Only 2 rows are left which are non-zero. So the rank is going to be, the rank is equal to 2. And that's it for today.